I have struggled to care about LEGO games for almost 14 years. After completing LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight before it's officially released, I can confidently say this is one of the best LEGO games since LEGO Batman 2. The decision to change the traditional formula is refreshing, and it delivered an experience that focuses on quality over quantity. That decision had a lot of payoffs, but it also introduced new problems of its own. During my 30 hours of 100% completion, I have a lot to talk about. Of course, this will be spoiler free. Let's get into it. Instead of advertising hundreds of playable characters, this game has 7. Quite a stark change considering most LEGO games were designed for replaying levels with different characters and abilities. The idea was to give more depth to each playable character rather than single abilities for each character. I appreciated this, as it allows for the player to develop Batman and grow his abilities rather than relying on suits to solve one puzzle. Whilst this is a positive change, it also meant that every level collectible could be found on the initial playthrough. There is no reason to replay levels, which longtime fans could dislike. Sprinkled throughout the levels, there are of course the classic LEGO-style puzzles. These puzzles are designed for people of all ages, and I don't believe anybody would need to utilize a guide. For more complex puzzles, the game offers puzzle rooms, which I really enjoyed. Level puzzles are small bumps in the path, but the puzzle rooms are entire roadblocks, which had enough challenge to have me questioning myself. I liked this approach, as it meant finding collectibles took no more than 5 minutes. There was never a time I experienced frustration, which kept me hooked just to get one more collectible before bed. The best part of the game is being able to change your suit. The reward for collection milestones are directly tied to suits or vehicles. This means that every collectible works towards getting a new suit, which makes it exciting once the player unlocks the one they want. The Skywalker Saga implemented multiple paths to complete a level, but they didn't feel impactful. Taking path A or B had no memorable impact on how the level played out. This game has a linear path of progression, but offers the opportunity to utilize stealth or engage in brawls, which I think was a much better approach. The decision to implement Arkham-style gameplay was a great approach as it kept the frequent combat encounters fresh. While previous games had button-mashing brawls, this game has combat with counters, dodging, gadget attacks, focus abilities, and stealth takedowns. The enemy variety pushes the player to cycle through mobility and attacks, resulting in dynamic fights where every input matters. Spamming attacks doesn't work since enemies can shoot, charge, or sneak a punch in to interrupt combos. Since combat is a big part of the game, the varying attacks and enemies felt more exciting as the player had more tools and the enemies weren't one-dimensional. Rather than one continuous story, the game features multiple chapters. This is not a continuous Batman story, but rather an anthology that celebrates Batman's memorable moments from films. For those that played the original LEGO Batman game, it's a return to that structure where each level has a dedicated villain and each chapter has an overall villain. Since the focus is on celebrating Batman, it's an effective way to showcase his rogues gallery. Each chapter focuses on Batman working with one of the 6 companions to give each character their own time in the spotlight. In effect, this works quite well, as the game shifts stories frequently like a comic or cartoon. It's not just about Batman, but also the people surrounding him. Of course, I can't forget to mention Gotham. For years I have been disappointed in the open world of LEGO games. The Skywalker Saga had containerized planets with no real freedom to explore, and LEGO Batman 3 had a similar approach where the player was confined to exploring planets. Finally getting a proper Gotham City I can drive around was exactly what I wanted. Unfortunately, the philosophy of quality over quantity meant that the aerial and water vehicles are not in the game. I found this a little disappointing, but the fact I could glide around the city did make up for this. What impressed me is the density of the world. Collectibles and side activities are sprinkled within 30 seconds of each other. There is never an area with nothing to do. The player can collect clues to find criminals, solve riddler puzzles, or react to newly developing crimes. It ensures there is always something to do and encourage natural exploration rather than fast travel. Visually, this is the best looking LEGO game TT Games have made. The shift to Unreal Engine 5 provides a major graphical overhaul to surface textures, dynamic lighting, and particles. The toy-like plastic has that imperfect sheen and scratches that far exceed models from prior LEGO games. LEGO Batman looks better than he ever has in a previous game. The trade-off with the improved graphical fidelity are the performance costs. Never in my history of playing a game on PC have I ever had to lower the resolution of the game I'm playing to achieve a stable frame rate. Somehow LEGO Batman was more graphically intensive than Cyberpunk 2077 or Death Stranding. On 4K max settings, the game has frequent frame drops, especially in the open world. A lot of these issues seem to be tied with UE5's rendering techniques, especially with anti-aliasing. Lighting can look vibrant, especially when bouncing off reflections, but there's also noticeable ghosting, shimmering, and smearing. The fact that frame generation was recommended by the developers is incredibly disappointing, and it looks far worse than anti-aliasing. What stood out were the translucent models, which had this smearing effect that took me away from the gameplay. Thankfully, interiors and dedicated levels delivered a more consistent performance, but I still noticed inconsistent frame rates until I shifted to 1440p. Within Gotham, however, the frame rate often couldn't hit a stable 60 FPS, especially at high speeds using the Batmobile. Considering my specs couldn't run at max settings, I have concerns about more modest hardware. I don't think this issue is specific to this game, as it appears to be a common trend among Unreal Engine 5 games. It's likely a trend that will continue, and it's not one that I look forward to. Something positive about UE5 was the shift from real-time cutscenes to gameplay. I loved how story moments integrated QuickTime events without a pause screen or without a dramatic cutscene shift, giving the cutscenes a real graceful flow. The audio, on the other hand, was great for the most part. Lots of sound cues were taken from prior Arkham games, and it added a small auditory detail, which I loved. The Batmobiles all have different sounds, giving them all a bit of character rather than reusing the same sound effects. LEGO games have a very distinct sound to them, and thankfully that still remains. The music effectively sets the tone for each level and encounters. I'm a big fan of dynamic soundtracks, and it added further level of engagement to the gameplay. The voice acting is perhaps a point of contention. Whilst I recognize the voice actors do put in a great performance, it's hard to ignore the years of notable Batman voice actors. The cast certainly do their best they can, but part of me wishes Batman was voiced by someone who had more weight to their voice. In particular, Talia has a French accent for some strange reason, which felt very distracting. It feels as if the voice actors were doing impressions, especially since a lot of dialogue is a reference to previous pieces of Batman media. One of the most annoying parts of the game are the frequent dialogue prompts. I couldn't go more than 2 minutes without the game telling me what to do. I am completely fine with cheesy dialogue and jokes in a LEGO game, but being told what to do constantly is not okay. For those familiar with God of War Ragnarok's prompting, this is exactly like that, but as soon as the player is close to an object. It also becomes distracting whilst exploring Gotham and having the police constantly tell me about a crime roughly every minute. I was disappointed and frustrated I couldn't turn off hints. Since this is a collectathon, a majority of achievements are based on stats. There's no missable achievements, and it makes for a simple progression as most achievements just require grinding. The only achievement I had problems with were things have changed. There are 9 crimes to stop in total, but they don't always appear in that order. Unfortunately, this is a randomized event, and not all are specific to each island. Overall, it's a simple journey, and the achievements are a great reward for my efforts. LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight is a refreshing change to the traditional LEGO game formula. It's a celebration of Batman through his story, his suits, vehicles, friends, and his iconic rogues gallery. I'm happy to say that the game gave me almost everything I wanted. It retains features I love from LEGO games and injecting gameplay from the abandoned Arkham games. At times this feels less like a LEGO Batman game and more like a Batman LEGO game. I would still be cautious with buying it if you have a more modest hardware setup or don't enjoy using frame generation. That brings us to the end of this video. What did you think about this game? Have you played it already? What's your favorite Batman story or character? What's your favorite LEGO game? Let me know in the comments below.